I only have one question for you.
Anything.
Is your mother still alive?
Yes, of course she's alive.
I am not interested.
What do you mean you are not interested? I just told you my mother is alive.
Then there is nothing more to discuss.
Wait, are you rejecting me because my mother is alive?
The young man sat proudly in the middle of the compound, his back straight, his eyes shining with confidence. He had heard so many things about Adiku's beauty that he could barely hide his excitement. The elders sat nearby, pretending not to listen but listening to every word. A light breeze moved through the trees as Adiku stepped forward gracefully, her face calm, her smile soft and welcoming. She sat across from the suitor and studied him quietly for a moment. Then she spoke in a gentle voice that sounded almost too polite to carry danger. I only have one question for you. The young man nodded eagerly. Anything. Adiku smiled again, the kind of smile that could make a man believe his future was about to begin. Then she asked a strange question that would end everything. Is your mother still alive? The young man blinked, slightly confused. Yes, of course she is alive. For a brief moment the compound was silent. Then Adiku's smile slowly disappeared as if someone had wiped it off her face. Her expression turned calm, cold, and final. She straightened her wrapper and said quietly, I am not interested. The young man's mouth fell open in shock. What do you mean you are not interested? I just told you my mother is alive. Adiku stood up without anger, without explanation, as if the conversation had never even begun. Then there is nothing more to discuss. The elders exchanged confused glances. The young man stood up in disbelief. Wait, are you rejecting me because my mother is alive? But Adiku had already turned away. This was not the first man she had sent away with that strange question. And he would not be the last. Nobody understood why the beautiful daughter of a wealthy family kept rejecting every suitor who came for her hand in marriage. But the truth behind that question was a story buried deep in pain, fear, and memories that refused to die. Before we go into this powerful story, take a moment to support this channel by subscribing. Because stories like this carry lessons our hearts should never forget. Now sit back, relax, and allow me to take you on a powerful journey filled with emotion, drama, laughter, and deep moral lessons. This is the story of Adiku. Adiku was born into a house where wealth flowed like a river that never dried. Her father, Obina, was one of the wealthiest farmers anyone had ever known. His barns were always full, bursting with yam stacked so high that visitors often stopped to stare in amazement. His farm stretched far beyond the hills, covering the land with green life as far as the eyes could see. During harvest season the entire village spoke of Obina's yam barns with admiration. If hunger ever comes to this land, people would say with laughter, Obina's barn alone can feed us all. But the wealth of that household did not come only from farming. Adiku's mother, Nkem, was a powerful trader whose name carried respect in every marketplace. She sold palm oil that glowed like liquid gold, spices whose aroma filled the air, colorful fabrics that women traveled long distances to buy, and imported goods that made customers feel important the moment they touched them. People respected her wisdom. Children admired her kindness. Customers trusted her honesty so much that many bought from her without even checking the price. Their compound was always lively. Workers walked in and out carrying baskets of goods. Relatives visited almost every week. Laughter often filled the courtyard as people gathered to share food and stories. From the outside, anyone looking at that household would swear it was the picture of happiness and success. But inside the house, hidden behind the noise of prosperity, there was one shadow that refused to disappear. That shadow was Obina's mother, Neka. The old woman was feared by many and respected by even more. She was strong, sharp-tongued, and extremely proud. Her voice could cut through the air like a knife, and when she spoke, even grown men sometimes fell silent. In her heart she believed that no woman in the world was good enough for her son. Especially not Nkem. Every day she reminded Nkem that she was not truly part of the family. Sometimes she would stand in the middle of the compound, her walking stick tapping the ground angrily as she spoke. "You did not grow in this soil," she would say coldly. "You only came here to enjoy my son's wealth." And sometimes, when her anger grew stronger, she would add the words that pierced the deepest. "Do not forget yourself. This is not your home." The compound would fall quiet whenever those words were spoken. Young Adeku watched everything. Silently. From behind doors that were slightly open. From corners of the compound where children pretended to play. Sometimes even from under tables where small children hide when adults begin to argue. She loved her mother deeply, and what she saw confused her young heart. Nkem never shouted back. She never insulted her mother-in-law. Even when insulted. Even when humiliated. She simply smiled politely and continued her duties as if nothing had happened. But children notice pain even when adults try to hide it. Some nights, when the compound had gone quiet and the moonlight filled the rooms with pale silver light, Adeku would wake up and see something that broke her heart. Her mother sitting alone in the darkness, crying softly where no one else could see her. And each time Adeku saw those tears, something slowly grew inside her heart. A silent seed. A seed of fear. Ironically, the same woman who filled the house with harsh words had a very soft heart for one person. Neko loved Adeku deeply. She spoiled her more than anyone else in the compound. Whenever food was served, Neko would pull the little girl close and say proudly, "Come here, my granddaughter, you must eat well." She would place the best pieces of meat in Adeku's bowl and wave others away if they tried to take them. Sometimes she bought her colorful beads from the market and carefully tied them around her wrists and ankles, smiling with satisfaction as the beads jingled whenever the child walked. "Look at you," Neko would say proudly, admiring her. "You are the true daughter of this house." Yet even in those sweet moments, the bitterness inside the old woman never rested. Many times she would still insult Nkem right in front of the child. Sometimes she would bend close to Adeku and whisper words that were meant to sound like wisdom but carried poison inside them. "Listen carefully," she would murmur, her voice low and serious. "Your real family is your father's blood." Then she would glance toward Nkem and add quietly, "Your mother only came here." The young girl would stare at her grandmother, confused. She loved both women. She did not understand why one seemed determined to push the other away. Those words stayed in her young mind like riddles she could not solve. Years passed, and Adeku slowly grew older, but the tension inside the house never truly disappeared. Then one evening, after another terrible argument between Neka and Nkem that shook the entire compound, Adeku heard something that burned itself into her memory forever. She had been standing quietly near the doorway when her grandmother's angry voice rose again. "If my son had listened to me," Neka snapped bitterly, "he would have married someone better." The words fell like stones. Nkem said nothing, but the silence that followed was heavier than any reply. That night, as the compound slept and the crickets sang in the darkness, Adeku lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her young heart felt tight with fear and sadness. Finally she whispered to herself in the quiet of the night, making a decision that would shape her entire life. "I will never marry a man whose mother is alive." In her mind it was the only way to protect herself from the kind of pain she had seen her mother endure for years. Time moved forward as it always does. The little girl grew into a beautiful young woman. Adeku became graceful, intelligent, and elegant, the kind of woman who turned heads whenever she walked past. Her beauty spread across the land like a story people loved to repeat. Before long, suitors began arriving at her father's compound. Wealthy men came wearing fine clothes. Handsome young men arrived full of confidence. Farmers with large barns came to seek her hand. Traders who admired her mother's success tried their luck. Even educated men from distant places came hoping to win her heart. Her beauty attracted many, and her father's wealth made the interest even greater. But every single suitor who came for Adiku faced the same strange question. Whenever a suitor visited, Adiku would sit calmly before him, her posture graceful, her voice gentle, her smile warm and polite. Then she would ask the question that nobody expected. Is your mother still alive? Most men answered proudly without thinking twice.
Yes, of course
she is alive. And in that very moment, Adiku's smile would slowly disappear from her face as if a light had suddenly gone out. She would straighten herself, her expression calm and firm, and say quietly, "I am not interested." The men were always shocked. One man blinked repeatedly, thinking he had misunderstood. "Wait, what did you say?" Adiku repeated herself without emotion. "I said I am not interested." Another suitor frowned in confusion. "Are you rejecting me because my mother is alive?" But by then Adiku would already be rising to her feet, signaling that the conversation was over. And the stunned men would leave the compound wondering if they had just encountered the strangest woman in the entire land. Some men did not take the rejection quietly. One young man jumped to his feet in disbelief after hearing her calm refusal. His eyes widened with anger as he threw his hands into the air. "Do you want to marry a ghost?" he shouted loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the compound. Another suitor, who had arrived proudly with gifts and confidence, stared at Adiku as if he had just been insulted beyond forgiveness. "Who wishes death for someone's mother?" he barked angrily. "What kind of question is that?" A third man did not even bother to hide his disgust. He grabbed his walking stick, shook his head, and stormed out of the compound muttering loudly, "This woman is cursed." The compound would fall silent each time another suitor left in confusion or anger, but Adiku remained calm through it all. Her face never showed regret. Her voice never trembled. Inside her heart, she believed she was doing the right thing. She believed she was protecting herself from a life of humiliation like the one her mother had endured for years. To her, the strange question was not wickedness. It was survival. Sometimes, however, things became even worse. On rare occasions when a suitor was particularly handsome or charming, when his smile made her pause and her heart almost soften, Adiku would ask something even more shocking. She would tilt her head slightly and say in a quiet voice, "Is your mother old?" The man would blink in confusion. Before he could even answer properly, she would continue calmly, "Is she sick? Is she going to die soon?" That was usually the moment everything exploded. One man staggered backward as if someone had struck him. He held his chest dramatically and nearly fainted on the spot. "Chmo," he cried. "What kind of woman asks such things?" Another suitor pointed at her angrily, his voice shaking with outrage. "You are wicked," he shouted. "Even if my mother lives for 100 years, I will still honor her. You should be ashamed." Word of Adiku's strange behavior spread quickly through the entire village. In the marketplace, women gathered in small groups whispering and shaking their heads. "Have you heard what Obina's daughter is doing?" one woman asked quietly. Another leaned closer and whispered back, "She asks men if their mothers are alive before she agrees to marry them." The women gasped and covered their mouths in shock. The men laughed loudly whenever the story reached them. "That girl is chasing away every husband in the land," one man joked. Young girls carried the gossip from house to house, repeating the story with excitement. Some people said confidently, "Adiku is proud because her father is rich." Others shook their heads and said in low voices, "No, something is wrong with that girl. She must be mad." But for all the noise and gossip spreading through the village, nobody truly understood the reason behind her strange behavior. Not even her own father. Obina became deeply confused and frustrated. One evening he sat with his wife in the quiet of their room, rubbing his forehead in worry. "This girl is chasing away good husbands," he said with a tired sigh. "Strong men, wealthy men, responsible men, all of them leave this house shaking their heads." He looked at Kem helplessly and added, "I don't understand her." But Nkem remained quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful and troubled. A mother's heart often senses what others cannot see. Finally she spoke softly, "There is something inside her heart we do not know yet." She looked toward the doorway where Adeku had passed earlier that evening and added quietly, "Our daughter is not wicked, something deeper is hurting her." One quiet evening, when the sun had already begun to sink behind the trees and the compound was calm, Obinna and Nkem called their daughter to sit with them. Adeku walked in slowly and sat before them, sensing the seriousness in their faces. For a moment nobody spoke. Then her father cleared his throat and leaned forward gently. "My daughter," Obinna said in a calm voice, "there is something we must ask you." Adeku looked at the ground, already knowing what was coming. Her father continued softly, "Why do you keep asking men if their mothers are alive?" The question hung in the air like a heavy weight. Adeku remained silent. Her eyes lowered to the floor. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her wrapper, but her lips remained sealed. Obinna waited patiently, expecting an explanation, but none came. Nkem leaned forward and touched her daughter's hand gently. "Adeku," she said softly, "we are your parents. You can tell us anything. Why are you rejecting every suitor because of their mothers?" Still Adeku said nothing. Her silence was not stubbornness, but fear. Deep inside her heart she was still the little girl hiding behind doors, watching her mother endure painful words. She was still afraid that one day she would marry into a house where she too would be treated like an outsider. Her parents tried again, asking different questions, speaking gently, hoping she would finally open her heart. But Adeku only sat there quietly, her head bowed, her lips sealed as if locked by invisible chains. After a long moment, Obinna sighed heavily. Nkem exchanged a worried glance with him. The conversation ended the same way it began, with silence and confusion. Life in the compound continued, but the mystery inside Adeku's heart remained hidden. Adeku had an elder brother named Chukudi. Unlike the tension that surrounded his sister's marriage discussions, Chukudi was cheerful, lively, and responsible. He was the kind of young man who filled a room with laughter the moment he entered. One afternoon he arrived home with a bright smile on his face and someone walking proudly beside him. The woman's name was Kayamika. She was strikingly beautiful, with confident eyes and a posture that showed she knew her worth. There was also something strong about her presence, something bold that made people notice her immediately. Chukudi stood proudly in the middle of the compound and announced with excitement, "Father, Mother, I want to marry her." The news spread quickly through the house, and soon the entire family gathered to meet the woman who had captured Chukudi's heart. Nkem welcomed Kayamika warmly, just as she welcomed everyone who entered her home. "You are welcome, my daughter," she said kindly. "Any woman my son loves is welcome here." Mats were brought out, and food was served generously as was the custom of the house. Bowls of soup and plates of food filled the air with warm aromas. Everyone sat together smiling and chatting, trying to make the young woman feel comfortable. Chukudi laughed proudly, clearly pleased with the way things were going. Even Adeku watched quietly, studying the woman her brother wanted to marry. For a while everything seemed perfect. The atmosphere was light. Laughter moved easily through the compound. But then something changed. Kayamika slowly lifted her eyes and looked directly at Nkem. And in that moment, the air in the compound shifted in a way nobody expected. Suddenly, without warning, Kayamika pushed her chair back and stood up. The movement was so abrupt that the laughter in the compound died instantly. Her face had changed, and when she spoke, her voice was cold and sharp enough to slice through the peaceful evening. "I cannot marry a man whose mother is alive." The words dropped like a heavy stone into still water. The entire compound froze. The bowls of food remained untouched. The breeze that had been gently moving through the trees seemed to disappear. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Chukudi stared at her as if he had not heard her correctly. Then, Before anyone else could react, Adiku shot up from her seat like lightning striking the ground. Her eyes burned with fury as she pointed directly at Kayameka. "How dare you?" she shouted, her voice shaking the air. "What kind of nonsense is that?" The compound erupted into tension as Adiku's anger poured out like a flood that had been waiting for years. "You want my brother to kill his mother," she yelled, stepping forward. "Is that what you are saying?" Kayameka remained standing, her chin lifted stubbornly, but Adiku was not done. "Leave this house," Adiku thundered, pointing toward the gate. "Leave our compound and never return here again." Her voice echoed through the compound walls, sending chickens scattering and drawing the attention of workers outside. The anger in her voice was so fierce that even Chukudi stood frozen, unsure of what to say. For a moment Kayameka looked around at the stunned faces watching her. Then, without another word, she turned sharply and stormed out of the compound, her footsteps heavy with pride and anger. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Slowly the dust settled. But as the compound grew quiet again, something strange happened. Adiku suddenly froze where she stood. Her breathing slowed. Her face changed as if a realization had just broken open inside her mind. The words she had just shouted began echoing inside her head. "I cannot marry a man whose mother is alive." The sentence repeated again and again in her mind. The exact same words she had spoken to countless suitors over the years. The exact same cruel sentence she had used to send men away from her father's compound. It struck her like thunder crashing through the sky. Her anger melted instantly into shock. She had become the very thing she hated. The realization crushed her like a heavy weight. Before anyone could understand what was happening, Adiku's legs gave way beneath her. She fell to her knees in the middle of the compound. Tears burst from her eyes as she began crying uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking with deep sobs that startled everyone watching. "Adiku!" Nkem exclaimed in alarm as she rushed forward. Obina stood up quickly, his face filled with confusion and concern. Chukudi stared in shock, still trying to understand everything that had just happened. But Adiku could not stop crying. Years of fear, pain, and hidden emotions were suddenly pouring out all at once. Finally, through her tears and broken breaths, she lifted her head slightly and spoke, her voice trembling as the truth she had buried for so long finally began to come out. Through her tears, Adiku finally spoke, her voice breaking with every word. I washed her, my grandmother, she tormented mother every day. She made her feel like an outsider, like she didn't belong. I was small, but I saw everything." Her shoulders shook as the sobs overtook her. I was afraid that if I ever married, I would suffer the same fate. That I would live under someone's cruelty. That the only safe marriage, the only safe life, is one where the mother-in-law is gone." Her parents listened quietly, their faces still, absorbing the weight of her confession. Nkem knelt beside her, lifting Adiku gently from the ground, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "My daughter," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying the strength of a lifetime of wisdom, "not every mother-in-law is like my own. You cannot punish innocent people because of someone else's cruelty. You must let your heart be free." Her words sank deep, soft but powerful, like rain on dry soil. Obina joined them, placing a hand on her trembling shoulder. "Fear," he said gently, "fear can build prisons inside the heart. And you have been living inside one for far too long. But today, you are beginning to step outside." Adiku's tears fell faster, hotter, but something inside her began to shift. A small spark of relief, a fragile hope, a first taste of freedom from the prison she had built herself. Time passed slowly. Seasons changed. Adiku's spirit softened. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and allowed herself to hope again. She became more open, more confident, more willing to trust. Then one day, a messenger arrived at the compound carrying news of a new suitor, a man whose reputation was known across the land. Her heart beat faster, curiosity and a flicker of excitement dancing together. Something told her this visit would not be like the others. When the young man arrived at the compound, Adiku felt her old fear stir for a moment, a small whisper of the past she had struggled to silence. She sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating faster than she expected. For a long moment she looked at him, studying his face, the kindness in his eyes. Then, her voice trembling slightly, she asked the question she had asked so many times before, though tonight it sounded different, softer, unsure. "Are your parents alive?" Akena's eyes sparkled with calm warmth. He smiled gently and nodded. "Yes," he said. "They are both alive." Adiku hesitated. The words lingered in her mind. A wave of fear tried to rise again, but she remembered the gentle voices of her parents, the lessons they had whispered to her when she had cried on the floor of her own home. Slowly, she felt the walls around her heart shift. She smiled back, a real smile this time, one that carried trust, hope, and something like courage. For the first time in her life, she whispered clearly, firmly, yes. Her parents, watching from nearby, exchanged stunned glances. Shock danced in their eyes for a moment, then melted into joy. Tears of relief and happiness filled Nkem's eyes as she held her husband's hand, both of them smiling at their daughter finally stepping into love. Later, Adiku visited Akena's home. His mother, Ngozi, rose to greet her with open arms, her face radiating warmth. She hugged Adiku tightly. She fed her with care. She blessed her with words that seemed to fill the air with light. Adiku was confused. This woman, a mother, showed nothing but kindness. She treated Adiku like a daughter, not a stranger, not an outsider. In that moment, understanding dawned slowly, bright and piercing. Her grandmother had been the problem all along. Not every mother-in-law carried cruelty in her heart. Some, like Ngozi, carried love, respect, and the kind of kindness that could heal even the deepest fears. Adiku finally understood. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and golden, as if the sun itself had come to celebrate. The compound was alive with music, drums beating in steady rhythm, flutes singing notes that made hearts sway. Everywhere people danced, feet stamping the earth in joy, hands clapping, voices raised in laughter and song. Adiku walked gracefully through the crowd, her dress flowing like water, her beads sparkling in the sunlight. She looked radiant, a vision of beauty and hope, her eyes shining with a happiness that had been denied to her for so long. Her parents stood nearby, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter move with elegance and pride. "Look at her," Nkem whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "My daughter, she has finally found her joy." Obina wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his lips trembling with unspoken words. "Yes," he said softly. "She deserves this, she deserves all of it." Around them, the air was filled with laughter, the music rising higher, children spinning in excitement, elders swaying gently, everyone celebrating not just a marriage, but the triumph of love, understanding, and healing. After the wedding, life settled into a gentle rhythm for Adiku. She lived peacefully with her husband, Akena, and his parents, Ngozi and her husband, in a home filled with warmth. Every morning, the smell of fresh food prepared with care greeted her, and the laughter of the family echoed through the rooms. There was love in every gesture, respect in every conversation, understanding in every silence. Ngozi would call her gently, "Adiku, my daughter, sit and eat with us," and she felt the words wrap around her like a comforting blanket. Akena's hand would find hers in quiet moments, a soft reminder that she was safe, cherished, wanted. The fear that had haunted her childhood, the fear of being treated like an outsider, of living under harsh words and cold stares, slowly disappeared, fading like mist under the morning sun. Even in the small things, Adiku noticed the difference: laughter shared over dinner, advice given with care, mistakes forgiven with patience. One evening, as she helped Ngozi sweep the courtyard, she smiled softly and said, "Mother, I never knew a mother-in-law could be so kind." Ngozi laughed lightly, the sound warm and rich. "Not all of us are like my mother," she said. "Some of us are here to love." And in that moment, Adiku finally felt it, peace, freedom, and the joy of a heart unafraid. Years passed, and life continued its gentle rhythm in the compound. Chukwudi, once the cheerful young man always full of laughter, had grown into a strong and responsible man. One day, he returned home with a woman who carried herself with quiet confidence and a gentle smile. Her name was Ifenanya. From the first moment she stepped into the house, it was clear she was different. She was kind in every word, respectful in every gesture, gentle in every motion. She greeted Nkem with warmth, bending slightly to touch her mother-in-law's hand as if she had known her all her life. "Mother Nkem," she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity, "I will always honor you as my own." Nkem's eyes glistened with tears at the words, touched by the genuine love in Ifenanya's heart. Chukwudi looked on, a proud smile spreading across his face, knowing he had found a woman who would bring harmony to the family, who would love and respect them as much as he loved her. And in that moment, Adiku watched quietly, her heart full, knowing that her brother's choice had brought healing, peace, and the kind of love that could finally mend old wounds. Adiku sat quietly on the veranda, watching the courtyard come alive with the laughter of children running in every direction. Their small feet pounded against the earth, their voices ringing like music that chased away the shadows of the past. The compound was full, vibrant, alive with energy, and the old pain that had once lingered there felt like a distant memory. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gold and crimson, Adiku turned to her mother, Nkem, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and relief. "Mother," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I almost destroyed my own happiness because of fear." Nkem reached out, placing her hand over hers, her smile gentle and knowing. "My daughter," she replied, her voice calm but filled with warmth, "pain can teach us wisdom, if we allow it." Adiku nodded slowly, letting the words sink deep into her heart. She finally understood that fear could distort the heart, that pain could create vows that trapped the soul, but love, true love, could heal even the deepest wounds. And sometimes, the family we once feared, the family we thought would bring only pain, becomes the very family that saves us.